This video is for entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to bully or harass anybody. It contains extreme violent content with disturbing details. So please put on your headphones and send the children out of the room. Today we're going to look at the 1980 prison riot of New Mexico State Penitentiary. Please check out my first part to it. I go through the timeline step by step and tell you what happens. Today we're going deep inside the belly of the beast. The land of New Mexico is drenched in blood. Some of the history books have been changed. Some of the stories have completely been erased, so it's hard to find out what happened on that land. Traumatic events and bloodshed create portals where ghosts come in and out. At least that's what some believe. The events of the riot were nothing more than demonic. Some of the most absolute evil I have ever heard of. Let's look at the New Mexico coat of arms here. There's 13 stars and there's 13 stripes. When I see the number 13, I think Friday the 13th. I also think of 13 Illuminati bloodlines. Here on the coat of arms, you can see a blue eagle with a snake in its mouth sitting on a cactus. And I figured out what that represents. Huitzilopochtli. It's an Aztec god of the sun and sacrifice. I found a description. They also call him the hummingbird. He's the chief god of the Aztecs and was called their god of war. According to legend, it was this god that urged them to leave their original homeland and led them to Mexico Valley region. It is believed that when the Aztecs left the area of what is now the southwestern U.S., they nomadically migrated south and reached the region where they built the city of Tenochtitlan. On this site, they made an official island that now stands in the center of today's Mexico City. When they first arrived in the area, they saw an eagle perched on top of a cactus eating a snake. This sighting fulfilled a prophecy indicating that this is where they should stay. It was a sign from the god Huitzilopochtli. The famous vision is still depicted on the National Seal of Mexico. So, an Aztec God of War and sacrifice is sitting right there on the coat of arms of New Mexico. This is from the openscroll.com, and this is the Satanic Calendar. It's the list of the satanic holidays. It is identical to the one that was released by the FBI in the 1980s. And there is a strange coincidence about the day the riot happened. It happened on February 2nd, and it was a full moon. February 2nd is also Candlemas, and it's a blood ritual involving animal or human sacrifice. February 2nd is also Satanic Revels, a sexual ritual, and that involves female victims, usually. There were no women at the prison that night. In the book, The Devil's Butcher Shop, it describes how a secretary called in for her shift that day because she had a bad feeling that something was going to happen. I read a story that there was a female prison guard that drank too much at dinner and overslept her shift. I cannot find that anywhere. I don't know if it was made up and it was, just to make the story sound better. But it could have been divine intervention that there were no women there that night. Now we're going to go on into the gory details. The riot was planned in advance. Officials were given plenty of notice that the prison was having problems. Guard brutality, poor food quality, faulty electrical system, mice, bugs, roaches, intestinal diseases, corrupt officials, rape, drug use. The governor was specifically told the prison is going to blow, and they did nothing. They were so negligent, it almost makes me think they wanted it to happen. 5 of the guards that were seized were protected by inmates. They were described as kind guards. One was a medical technician, and he was hidden with 7 other guards in the 2nd floor of the hospital, and they can hear the commotion below them with the inmates shooting up, taking all the pills. Some were even huffing paint. They got a hold of some paint thinner. So they were huffing paint, getting drunk off prison wine, taking all kinds of drugs, and huffing the paint. And it made just a crazy frenzy. There were no rules, nothing. Groups split off, and the death squad was out killing everyone. And E4 was the cell block where most of the murder was. E4 is where the snitches, mentally ill, and child molesters were kept. And if you were labeled a snitch, there were no questions. You couldn't explain yourself. You were thrown into E4. One of the inmates in E4 was a man who was raped by another inmate. And when he went to the officials to get justice for himself, they put him in E4. During the riot, his genitals were cut off and they shoved him in his mouth. A mentally ill black man in E4 that was usually laying on the floor naked in his cell was standing straight up in the middle of the cell, bewildered about what was going on. He was dismembered, and he was one of the first bodies that were released. They put him on a gurney and put his severed head in between his legs when they rolled it out of the door of the prison. E2 is where the homosexual inmates were segregated. A tear gas launcher was launched into their cell. The canister hit an inmate in the head and it blew off half of his head. The inmates in that cell barricaded themselves inside with the body with half of its head missing. Acetylene torches were used to cut through the bars of the cells, and it took about half an hour to get through. So the inmates had access to tools to get themselves out of the prison. They could have cut out, but they decided to cut in. One inmate used the flame of the torch on another inmate's eyes. The gases in his head built up and the back of his head exploded. Inmates took turns and lined up to have their way with some of the prison guards. 5 were protected, and 7 were brutally raped and tortured. None of them were killed. None of the guards were killed. Half of the guards died from suicide, drug overdoses, or alcohol use. The guards and everyone involved in the cleanup of the prison had PTSD. Some of the witnesses say they can't go to a barbecue anymore because it reminds them of the smell of burning flesh. One of the witnesses said he didn't understand how the other inmates could have an erection during this time. Rape and murder was going on everywhere. Dead bodies were hacked to pieces, and the medical examiner said the worst mutilations happened post-mortem, and some of the inmates were even participating in necrophilia. Governor Bruce King destroyed all the evidence in the report. The medical examiner determined there were 39 victims, but the governor decided 33 was a better number for him. How could things like this happen? Corrupt government officials. It was the perfect storm. Short staffing, guard brutality, poor food quality. The officials were stealing the food from the kitchen for themselves. The inmates described the meals with no meat. The living conditions in the prison were poor. Mice, bugs, roaches, disease. Rape, beatings. Sometimes I hear people say we should just get rid of the police. Look what happened here when they got rid of the guards, where there were no guards to watch over the prison. Gangs broke off and people fought for their lives. There were many people in there for something like bringing a small bag of cocaine over the border. And of course, yes, there were rapists and murderers and evil people in there. One thing that was amazing is there were people that banded together to survive. What changed? Nothing. Maybe they're not as neglectful now. But government officials really have a tendency to treat citizens like animals, don't they? Hundreds of thousands of dollars was unaccounted for in the corrections budget. You know what happened? Nothing. Government officials were able to do whatever they wanted. In the book, The Devil's Butcher Shop, it describes how every year they have their fancy governor's ball. Who pays for that? Taxpayers. There's no accountability with how the money is being spent and how things are being managed. Let's say I worked for a company and I stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. What would happen to me? I'd get thrown in prison. If I go to the hospital because I'm sick and I can't pay the bill, I'm going to get a summons to court and they're going to demand money from me. But when government officials mess around with the budget, they never get in trouble. The 1980 prison riot of New Mexico, the 1980 prison riot of the New Mexico State Penitentiary was an absolute perfect storm. It was a bomb waiting to go off, and the government knew about the dangerous conditions in there, and they did nothing. They still have their lavish parties. That was part 2 of the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot of 1980. And there might be a part 3. There's even more, guys. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for listening to me.